Welcome, everyone. This is my first podcast, Muslim Glory, and today we're going to talk about whether the Moroccan Muslims in the Netherlands are to blame for all the controversies surrounding them right now. And I'm going to look at the history of Muslims in the Netherlands, the Dutch also around the world, and what their relationship has been with the Muslims. And I will dive a little bit deeper into the Moroccans, but also other Muslims that are living in the Netherlands. My name is Raisa. This is my first podcast, so I'm very excited. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna try to do my best to give you a full picture. I have two masters. One is in political science, one is in international business, and I hope that with my expertise of working on the topic of Muslim glory around the world, but also political science around the world, the division of power, I can give you new insights into this topic. Okay, I've written down many things that I want to discuss with you because it's just too much, I think, for me at least, to memorize. So, as you might know, I'm a reformed women's leadership lecturer and also public speaker. But basically, in the past year, I was like, what am I doing with my time? Like, why do I care about this when the leaders I'm actually empowering, they don't really seem to care about justice? And so I started thinking, like, what can I focus on? I'm focusing on helping Muslims understand their history better, but also for them to get a bigger picture when it comes to current affairs. What is it that you should take into account? Which patterns have we seen in the past, and what can we take from that for the future? So that's going to be my goal. Inshallah, it will help you only contribute positively to your life. And inshallah, also make you more proud Muslims, because there's a lot of negative news about Muslims out there right now. I think the stats are like more than 60%, I think 68% of all media representation of Muslims is negative. So that means it's a lot of lies, but it's also a lot of linking them to negative events, like to, things they've done wrong, or, whenever there's someone who makes a misstep, that is 100% highlighted. But the things that are also very memorable and interesting about Muslims, you don't really hear about that. And so I'm trying to share that with you. Like, that's my goal. And yeah, today I thought it would be really interesting to talk about the Netherlands. Well, actually, I didn't think so. You guys told me to do that because I actually asked you guys, like, what should I talk about first? And I was initially going to talk about Muslims reaching the Americas first, or before Columbus. That was going to be my first podcast. But actually, you requested for me to speak about this topic first. So I actually was like, scratch that. I'm going to focus on this first. I researched this like this was my, like I had a school exam, okay? Like, I was like finding sources, reading multiple books. I was like, this feels like I'm back in high school or like university, when you're writing essays. And like, I wrote this kind of like, I wouldn't say essay because I don't want to scare you, but it's like a really big work to make you understand everything you need to know about the history of Muslims, the history of the Dutch, and where they collide and how that went, so that we can understand this issue that's going on better. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you some things about the Netherlands. Like, I'm born and raised there, so I really do feel a bit excited to talk about this. 6% of all people in the Netherlands currently is Muslim. So that's a lot of Moroccans. It's a lot of Turkish people, but it's also people from Pakistan, Iraq, Iran. But the main focus is a lot Moroccans. When people talk negatively about Islam, they really do, they scapegoated them, I feel. And so scapegoating is something I mention during my, on my social media a lot, because scapegoating politics is when a country has issues or a community has issues and they want to single out a group of people and then say like, oh, they're the one to blame. And so scapegoating politics has been used almost in every big conflict we've had in the world, like world wars. We had people who were scapegoated, and right now you can see a trend of scapegoating Muslims. And so I obviously feel really concerned about that, and I want to make sure that I support my fellow Muslims. I encourage them to keep going, but I also want them to know about their past, so that they know, like, everything they're saying about me, I shouldn't internalize that, because it's not healthy. And I'm also going to explain today why it's not healthy to internalize that. Okay, so I hope I'm gonna be on time because it's like only 30 minutes because I didn't want to bore you guys too much. But also, I don't know if I can like talk for like 30 minutes every week or like 40 or 50 or an hour. So I'm just doing myself a favor as well. Okay, so the general idea about Muslims in the Netherlands is that, they're actually not underperforming. There are Muslims who are very successful. Like, for example, we've had multiple mayors who have Muslim background, Muslim as in Moroccan because they were actually Moroccan. But we also have, I think, a few Turkish mayors right now who are women. I do not personally know anything about their religion, so I cannot say anything about that. But we have representation from all the different groups, all the groups with a migrant background in the Netherlands. And they're doing good on levels like politics, business. They're doing a lot of entrepreneurship, especially the Turkish population. And I think what's really interesting to know, though, is that a lot of these Muslims, when they end up in politics, they are incredibly committed to fighting injustice, whether it is, sticking up for the Muslim population or for the population from the Caribbean or, any type of discrimination. They do seem to care about that a lot. And that's why I am just so proud of them as well. We also have lawyers in the Netherlands who are, fighting big cases in the Netherlands, even sometimes suing the government. We currently have one lawyer. His name, I think, is Karim Ashaboun or something like I didn't write it down, but basically he's suing the government for a lot of missteps they took, which have affected a lot of Muslims. We have in the Council of Amsterdam multiple multiple Muslims, men. I know from a few men, and we have some women as well in the government. Okay, so that is something that I think you should know, but there have been also movements against these Muslims in the Netherlands, and a few of them are very notable. We've had this guy called Pim Fortuyn in 1979 who popularized, I would say, hating Muslims on a political level. Like, it was pretty intense what he did. He was one of the first people who would like openly speak about Muslims being a threat to our democracy, that they were dangerous for the women and gender equality. And basically, he was a very extreme person. I would say he was an extremist. But obviously, the way he would talk about Muslims was like they are extremists. And so that was very notable. Then we had also another party in 2006, which is called the PVV, the Party of the Freedom, Partij van de Vrijheid. And that one is actually led by Geert Wilders. It's interesting because I've been like around the world and people know Geert Wilders like everywhere. Like, I've been in Saudi Arabia where I remember one of my clients, like when I would meet him, one of the first things he was like, "Hey, yeah, aren't you from the country where Geert Wilders is from?" And I was like, "What? That's not what I want the Netherlands to be known for." But it is what it is. And basically, Pim Fortuyn, no, what is his name? Geert Wilders. Geert Wilders is like a copycat of Pim Fortuyn. Geert Wilders, he has an interesting past though, because he did live in Israel for a while. And he also has Indonesian roots, which makes it so weird that he hates, people of color. And Indonesians were also Muslim, are Muslim. The biggest Muslim country in the world is Indonesia. And like, he basically has his roots there. So he's a bit, that is a bit questionable. And so one of the most notable things he has done is he once had this event where he was like chanting to the people who were there. And it was like, this is like very well known. He was like, "Do you want more or less Moroccans?" And then the crowd was like super excited and they all started chanting like, "Less, less, less." Like, this is something that he's like super known for. So he was basically trying to radicalize people to, speak out against Muslims and to make them feel less wanted. And specifically Moroccans, he's really had it out for Moroccans. So that's something I really do find very painful to think about, whenever I see it or, clips of this behavior. What's really interesting though is that in his party, the PVV, why am I saying it like an English person? PVV, which is the Party van de Vrijheid, multiple people from that party have converted to Islam. So you have to understand these people started off in this party, you know, trying to being super extremist about not liking Muslims, and then they ended up converting to Islam. Like one of them has become like a true spokesperson for Islam because he wanted to read the Quran to debunk it, and then when he read it, it really touched his heart, like obviously. And then he became, at some point he became a Muslim. He has been, I'm pretty sure he's been like kicked out of the party, or maybe he just left, but he also married a Muslim lady, and now he speaks out very openly about this. I think it's really nice, mashallah. But basically that's him. We've also had some very controversial women in the Netherlands who wrote books against Islam. They were supposedly former Muslims. One of them is called Ayan Hirsi Ali. She was a Somali lady, if I'm not incorrect. And another one is another lady who wrote a book. Her name is Lale Gül, I think. She's Turkish. And basically, whenever in the Netherlands you write something negative about Muslims, like you immediately rise in the ranks. If you want to become like a star immediately, all you have to do in the Netherlands is like write a negative book about Islam, and you'll be treated like a superstar, like an intellectual superstar. Even if you create like the biggest trash, like you will literally be elevated. And so both of them have done that, but both of them also flee the country because I guess they did want to kind of, receive the validation of the people in the Netherlands. But then they were also receiving, obviously, the, discomfort and the straight up rejection of the Muslim community. But I guess the Netherlands didn't support them, like they didn't protect them. And so Ayan Hirsi Ali, particularly, she was facing a lot of risk by staying and speaking out very negatively, very disrespectfully about Muslims. And she had to flee the country. She went to the US, and I think there she's also put on like a throne, because she's like obviously this woman who openly wants to talk negatively about Islam. What has been found about her though is that her history didn't add up. Like she lied about how she got to the Netherlands. Turned out that she was one of those people she was campaigning against who actually illegally entered the country. And so I'm like, girl, you tried though. You tried. But in the end, Islam is always gonna be the winner in this. And, you cannot just speak so negatively about any religion without there being consequences. People are gonna be very upset. And so that's what happened to her. Okay, but then what I'm gonna do during this talk, I'm gonna check how long have I already spoken. I think it's like 10 minutes. Anyways, I want to debunk 4 myths about Moroccans. So there's 4 things that people love to repeat about them. There's 4 things they love to indirectly imply about them. They love to just make those little insinuations and, connections between Moroccan Muslims and Muslims in general. And these 4 myths, let's just say it like that. Okay, so the first one is the idea that's being spread is that the Moroccan Muslims specifically are more often criminals than people who are not Moroccan. And then specifically, obviously, they're talking about the Dutch people. The second myth is that the Moroccan Muslims are, I think, what is the second one? Women unfriendly. So they are women unfriendly. And that is obviously how the Netherlands like to present it. Some of these politicians like to say, this is a threat to our democracy. Then you have one that says that they're anti-Semitic, so that, they just say Muslims by nature are like that. Like we've had politicians actually campaign for that. They would just make these random claims saying like Muslims by nature are against Jews. Okay, anyways, and then we have the last one, and that's that Moroccan Muslims and Muslims in general are more extremists. So they're extreme in the way they behave. Okay, interesting. Let's go through it. Okay, so the first one is the Moroccans are criminals. Well, this has been debunked by the actual numbers by CBS, which is the Central Bureau for Statistics. And the idea is that, more often than the Dutch people, Moroccans are involved in crime. Well, CBS has actually proven that being involved in crime has nothing to do with where you're from. It has nothing to do with your migrant background. I'm trying to use the right terms because this changes every time in the Netherlands, but now we say someone with a migrant background. And it turns out that crime has a lot to do with where you grow up. So if you're living in an area that is underdeveloped, you're more likely to become a criminal. That's what they find. And so they found also that this is the same statistic for Moroccans, but also for the real Dutch. They have the same chances on becoming a criminal when they grow up in certain postal codes, certain areas. And this is interesting because I read something similar from KPMG, because I don't know if you know this, but I actually used to teach or still teach on inclusive leadership. And so this is something that's very relevant to my work. And a lot of times, people would say, oh, people in the workplace, they perform less well when they are a Muslim. They perform less well when they are migrants. It turns out that that wasn't true. They perform less well when they grow up in an area where they don't have opportunities. That's what the research says. And so that's really important for all of us to know. Where you grew up has decided where you are today. And I feel like this really applies to me. Because actually, okay, I have to tell you a story. I grew up in Amsterdam until I was 7 years old. And like my parents, my father had businesses in Amsterdam, but also somewhere in the suburbs, okay? And so we lived very nearby my dad's businesses in Amsterdam. But that place was a big ghetto, I'm not gonna lie. At that time, it was ghetto. Now it's like super classy. But at the time, it was ghetto. And I remember when I was in school, until I was like 7 or 8 years old, I was performing really badly. Like I was performing so bad. I was probably amongst, that's how I see it, I was amongst like the worst in my class. Like, I don't know if it was that bad, but it wasn't good. What happened is I moved to the suburbs at 7 years old. And when I moved to this new area, which is completely like a white area, I'm going to be honest with you, I became the best in my class. Okay. Like the difference is so huge. Like I cannot deny that. Like I am living proof of this. And so I just want to say I wouldn't even been here if it wasn't for my parents moving to the suburbs. Okay. Because I actually became like one of the best. Like one of the stories I love to tell everyone is that my teacher actually made me her assistant. So she put a sign on my desk so all the kids could line up during school and they could come to me with their homework. And then if I put the sign on red, they couldn't come because like I was so good at what I did anyways. So I was definitely not a natural like smarticle, but the area you live in, it really, really matters. So that's what I wanted to say. But also like this makes it really difficult for people like, for example, who are of color or, have a migrant background or are Muslim, because it turns out research very recently, the European Union actually published a report on this, and they said that Muslims specifically are being pushed out of good neighborhoods, are being discriminated everywhere in education, in healthcare, in housing, everywhere they go, they are being discriminated. So even if you live, for example, in a bad area and you want to go to a good area, do you even have the opportunity? Apparently, no. And so that's something that I feel like as a democracy, you need to check yourself because that's not democratic at all. And I also can attest to that because I remember when I lived in Amsterdam, like I didn't have the issues I had when I lived in the suburbs, because like in the suburbs, like people would literally spit on me. If I would go to school, they would spit on me, call me names. Okay. There were kids in my class that were not allowed to play with me because they were like, no, I'm not allowed to play with you. My mom told me. And so I remember the first day my sister and I entered that school, we were like beat up by all these kids. And so it's like, yeah, you gotta pay a price. You gotta pay a price to go to the suburbs and then live a different life, I guess. And I can also understand why some people say, like, I guess we don't want that for our kids. So anyways, that's something I wanted to say. But I just want to also make you aware of how this affects people when you are growing up in a society where people constantly remind you that you are less wanted or less smart. And so I have read this research, and I think it was in a book from the US about subconscious bias, but it's Indian lady, and she connected it to the growth mindset. But basically, she mentioned a research where Black students in the US were asked to take an exam, two groups. One of the groups was asked to indicate that they were Black before starting the exam. The other group was not asked to indicate that they were Black. And it turned out that the kids who had to write down right before taking an exam that they were Black performed less well on the exam. Okay, I'm just gonna give you a second to let that marinate. What does it mean? It means that when you are reminded of something that, in societies always talk negatively about, it's always being imprinted in you. The fact that you are a Muslim, you're black, you're, I don't know, any type of characteristic that's associated with negativity, when you're reminded of that, you actually achieve less well results. And so it is something that, when you constantly tell a population you're not good, you're not good, you're not good, the chances of them then also not achieving really good results, it's higher, okay? And so that's one of the last things I wanted to mention about them. They are criminals. No, they are not criminals. According to the statistics, they're not. I mean, if they have the right opportunities, they're just as successful as everyone else, but they do not get those opportunities in countries where they cannot move out of bad areas, get good jobs, be treated equally in education, housing, healthcare, all of that. So I just wanted to start off with that. That's a really important thing. And I'm also very passionate about it. Okay. Anyways, then we get to the second point that is a myth about Moroccan Muslims, that they are women unfriendly. And so this was something that I think Pimportan started making more popular. And this was 1997. This wasn't the first time, though, that the Netherlands started creating very negative narratives around Muslims, though, because I'll get to that. That was actually about 10 years before that. But he was someone who really wanted to promote the idea of Muslims not treating women well. And I think that's really interesting because, I personally have published, I think, 30 videos about influential Muslim women since February 2024. And I mean, if you know anything about either the Quran or the history of Muslims, you know that Islam has nothing to do with the oppression of women, okay? Islam was the first religion worldwide to give women rights, which have been achieved here in the West not even 100 years ago. If you're talking about owning property, having a bank account, not even 100 years ago, women were allowed to do that in the West. I think it was the 1960s or 80s in the US, okay? Women were doing all types of jobs that women were not allowed to do in these parts of the world. Women are allowed to get divorces in Islam, okay? We're talking about the year 623, the revelation of Islam. So a little bit later, but in the 600s, yeah, you could say. And so that's a difference of almost 1400 years. I'm sorry, but there is no, let's say, Islamic basis to say that women are treated less well amongst the Moroccan Muslims. Or if you look at the history of Islam, and then especially amongst the Moroccans, they were the epicenter of science and innovation, let's say 1400 years ago for many centuries, while Europe wasn't able to keep up. So I also feel like that's really something, it doesn't make sense. Okay, does the culture sometimes play a role in these parts of the world, or, everywhere in the world nowadays, where women aren't given as many chances? Of course, that's definitely a thing. But does that have anything to do with Islam? No, I don't think so. Okay, but apart from that, I do want to make you aware of one thing, though. The Netherlands itself is underperforming when it comes to gender equality themselves. So for them to also zoom in on this and to make it a big deal, I feel like it's almost embarrassing, because we're clearly not the right party to be critical like this. And so I'm going to share some statistics with you, because working in the Netherlands, I was always sharing this because it was very relevant in my workshops about inclusion, that people think in the Netherlands, oh, we're doing amazing. I would always get a lot of participants in my workshop saying why do we have to talk about this? We are doing so well. And I'd have to be like, you clearly have not read any research on this topic. So let me enlighten you. Okay, so I'm going to share some statistics with you. Okay, so it was only 1975 that men and women were seen as equal in the Netherlands. That's one thing that I think is very late. But when it comes to the Gender Equality Index, the Netherlands has, performed poorly for many years. Right now, we're number 28 in the world. 28, okay? There's Muslim countries like Albania who are actually 10 spots ahead of us. Number 17. Okay, 11 spots ahead of us. Countries that the Netherlands would consider third world countries like Rwanda, Mozambique, Jamaica, Philippines, Chile, they are all performing way better than the Netherlands. Yet we are the one to, pinpoint who needs to behave better. I don't think we're in that position. Okay. And then femicide in the Netherlands is actually worse here than, for example, in a country like Saudi Arabia, Oman, Bahrain. So I'm like, you literally are not the right person to speak negatively about Muslims when actually we really do have a track record that's very positive, but this is the thing that's being created, like it's an idea that's being created. And I do want to talk about that a little bit more. I will talk about this a little bit more when it comes to other countries as well. Like, for example, France does this, but the US does it as well. The weaponization of feminism, because I personally think that this is what's happening here. Okay, so feminism is something that oftentimes is being used to destroy Muslim communities. Okay, I'm gonna say something that's very intense to say destroy, but we actually have evidence of this happening in Afghanistan, Iraq, where invasions, entire invasions, were based on the weaponization of feminism. And by that I mean, they try to create an idea. Oh, we need to save the women. We need to save the women. The women are being treated poorly. The women need to be saved. And that's how they get the support of the public. And that's why they sometimes are able to invade a country. So that's what's happened in the past. In Afghanistan is a really good example of it. Algeria has been an example for the French, and Afghanistan for the Dutch, for the Americans. And so here it's done, to the Moroccans, where there's this idea like, oh, we need to save them. But fact is, today in Amsterdam, the group that's attacked the most with physical violence are Muslim women who wear a hijab. So I'm like, that's really interesting. You're saying that they need to be safe, but they are the least safe in their country. So that doesn't really make sense. Okay, anyways, that is something that I think we really need to talk about. Am I already half an hour in? I think so. Okay, anyways, wow, time is flying when you're criticizing everyone. All right, so that's one thing I want to say. And I guess we're going to have to do a second podcast to do this. I don't even know how this works. I've never watched a podcast in my life. And so basically, I'm not sure what to do. I already did half an hour, but I was supposed to do half an hour in total. So maybe I'll just stop here. And then the second week will be the second podcast. Okay, anyways. If I stop here, I hope you enjoyed it, but there's so much more to come. So please do come back. And if I'm going to post the whole thing at once, let me just continue. Thank you for tuning in to Muslim Glory. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you will never miss out on new content. If you want to amplify your voice and share your story, please sign up for my Speak Out course to kickstart your journey as a confident public speaker and content creator who can spread the word. Just head over to www.speakoutcourse.com to learn more. And remember, I'll be back next Sunday with another informative episode, inshallah, celebrating Muslim glory. So please mark your calendar and join me again. Until then, stay inspired and keep striving for more excellence.